Hi, everyone. I'm Brett Thielen. I'm the science director at the Harris Center for Conservation Education. I'm here with Nate Marchesalt, our staff ecologist. If you want to say hi to everyone, Nate, go for it.
Hey, folks, nice to meet you.
So we're going to be talking salamanders with y'all tonight. So the Harris Center is a nonprofit based in the Monadnock region of Southwest New Hampshire, and we help people fall in love with the natural world. And we do that in three ways. One is land protection. So anyone who is local to us, I always like to share, we're up to more than 25,000 acres of protected land in an area we call the super sanctuary. And a lot of that is open for hiking, birding, salamander searching, and other recreation. We coordinate conservation research on that land and throughout the region, including a number of community science programs like the one you're learning about tonight. That's Nate and my work with the Harris Center. And then really at the heart of everything we do is environmental education for all ages, from babies in backpacks to residents of retirement communities, all points in between. We have an incredible calendar of events that we offer every year, everything from in-person hikes and birding outings and guided paddles, film showings, lectures, Zoom talks like this one. So if you're new to us, I really feel like we have something for everyone who has an interest in the natural world, and I'd really encourage you to check us out. We have all of our spring events just got posted to our online calendar at harriscenter.org, and Nate will maybe put that link to the events page in the chat so you can check out all the really good stuff to come. And of course, I just always want to mention none of what we do would be possible without our supporters, and I know there are at least some of you out there, so thank you all for making this work possible. So, okay, now we're gonna move on to the main event. Anyway, here we go. So you're here tonight to learn about the Salamander Crossing Brigades, and I consider this kind of an invitation to what is one of the most magical phenomena in the natural world, particularly in the spring. So tonight we are going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about the spring amphibian migration, sometimes called Big Night. We're going to talk about what it is, when it happens, where it happens. We're going to talk about how to identify the different species that you might see out and about on migration nights. We're going to talk about why amphibians matter, how the crossing brigades work for those of you who would like to volunteer. We coordinate efforts in the Monadnock region of Southwest New Hampshire. I know there are people here from further afield. So for those of you who might not have Harris Center crossings near you, we'll talk about how to find crossings close to home. A few words about a special project, looking at spotted salamanders, and then some hopeful words to end on about some of the successes that this project has helped make happen. So that is our task before us. And we're going to start with Big Night, which is probably a term you've heard. It's a myth that environmental educators just love to tell. And the myth kind of goes something like this. It's a little different this year given the winter we've had, but the myth goes that after a long, snowy, cold, frozen winter, the snow melts, the ground thaws, and one day it begins to rain. And that rain continues all through the day and into that one big night. And on that one big night, all of the spotted salamanders and all of the wood frogs and all of the spring peepers clamber up from the underground burrows where they have spent the winter. And on that one big night, they move across the landscape to vernal pools to breed. This myth is called Big Night. And the magic of that, of thousands of amphibians afoot moving with the spring toward their breeding wetlands, that is true. The reason I call it a myth is because I have never seen it happen on just one night. We often have a few big nights, some medium nights, a few small nights. And the reason for that is that it's all dependent on the weather. And so before I talk about those weather things, I just want to point out this photo was taken by my friend Dave. And I love it so much because that spotted salamander, see all that mud that is caked to its head and body? That animal has just emerged from underground. It's its first look at the above ground world since sometime last fall, which is amazing, or maybe even last spring. So Big night is a weather-dependent phenomenon. And every year, the question I get asked the most is, when will the salamanders migrate? And it would make everyone's lives easier if I could say April 10th. Put it on your calendar, don't miss it. But I can't do that because it's all weather dependent, and we need three things to come together. The first thing is thawed ground. So these animals spend their winters underground. So even if spring is in the air above ground, if the ground is still frozen, the soil is still frozen, they won't get the message. So that's the first thing we're looking for. We're finally there in the Monadnock region, maybe not in places like Maine. The next is warm nighttime temperatures. Amphibians are ectotherms, cold-blooded animals, which means that their body temperature mirrors that of their surroundings. And so they really need temperatures above 40 degrees to get going. 45 is even better. And this, of course, is nighttime temperatures because this is a nocturnal phenomenon. And the last is rain. And I have a little asterisk there because I have seen some years, if we had a really dry spring, where they might move in a fog or just a mist, or maybe on ground that was wet from rain earlier in the day. But your classic big night is 45 to 50 degrees and raining steadily throughout the evening. That is what we are looking for. So of course, the other question I get, why did the salamander cross the road? What is happening here? Why are all these animals on roads? And this is a breeding migration. So they are moving from the woods where they spend most of their lives. These are woodland amphibians, to wetlands to court and lay eggs. And in places on the landscape where there is a road between those woods and those wetlands, they simply have to cross the road to get where they're going, to continue with their lives. And they have to do it twice each year because they have to cross into the wetland. They're in there for a few weeks to lay their eggs, and then they have to come back out. So there's really two migrations, although that outward migration is sometimes not as concentrated as the big nights of their way moving in. So we're going to talk a little bit about the species that you might see if you come out on a big night and tips for identifying them. We'll start with the poster child, the poster salamander for this whole movement, the spotted salamander. These are hard to mistake for anything else. They're 6 to 8 inches long, dark gray or black skin, bright yellow polka dots. They spend 95% of their lives underground. So really the best chance to see them is on these migration nights. It's one of the few times when they are above ground. And they are quite breathtaking. The polka dots are a giveaway that you're looking at a spotted salamander. They can live more than 20 years if they're not eaten by a barred owl or hit by a car. And so when you're out there on these nights, some people here might be holding a salamander that's older than they are, which is really interesting to consider. They also have incredible smiles. That is also an identifying characteristic of a spotted salamander. The next one, so we're talking with early spring. So these next few weeks, there's really only 3 or 4 species you're likely to see out and about. And these are the big ones. So spotted salamander, the next one is this one, the wood frog. This is a brown or orangish frog, about slightly smaller than the palm of my hand. The real identifying characteristic here is the dark mask behind each eye, the bandit's mask. And then once they've crossed the road, you won't hear this on the road, but once they get where they're going, the males serenade, and they have a very distinctive sound, which I'll play for you. That is not ducks. That is frogs. Those are wood frogs, recorded in Robin Hood Park in Keene, New Hampshire a few years ago. And that is a sure sound of spring. So this is also this slide is my reminder to tell you about their superpower, which is that they survive winter by freezing solid. They produce a natural antifreeze that protects their internal organs. Their hearts stop beating, their lungs stop breathing, and they wait in a state of suspended animation for spring. And as a result, they're able to overwinter just 3 or 4 inches below the forest floor, which means that they're often the first to emerge, along with the spring peepers, who also share this superpower. Spotted salamanders cannot survive freezing, so they have to overwinter below the freeze line, which could be 3 or 4 feet deep. So they come out a little bit later in the season sometimes than the wood frogs. Here is our third of the big three early spring, and you all are going to tell us what it is, maybe in the chat once you hear what the sound that it makes. And assuming somebody's writing this in the chat. What do we got there? Peepers. Yeah. These are our spring peepers. This is really the sound of spring. So spring peepers are a very tiny frog. They have one of the largest sound volume to body mass ratios of any animal. So they are the size as full-grown adults as the tip of my thumb, 1 to 2 inches, brown or tan in color. They also have really distinctive toe pads, suction cup toes to help them climb trees. And then I have, just to show scale, here's some for size. They pack a punch for such a little critter. They've been recorded at 120 decibels, which is louder than a jackhammer at close range. Really incredible. And they migrate at some of our sites by the hundreds on any given night. So those are our big three: spotted salamander, wood frog, spring peeper. At some sites in Keene, we have a fourth that comes out in the early spring. There's a group of salamanders that are related to the spotted salamanders. They're all considered mole salamanders because they live underground like moles do. And in this group is this salamander called the Jefferson salamander, which has this kind of gray skin with light blue flecking. They're a little smaller than spotted salamanders, maybe 5 to 7 inches instead of 6 to 8. They have really long toes and that kind of rudder-like tail. Jefferson salamanders are closely related to a blue spotted salamander, which has dark skin and bright blue flecking. And in places where they coexist, which is most of New Hampshire, they frequently hybridize, and you cannot tell simply by looking at them which variety they are. And so we assume that all of the ones that we are seeing are these hybrids. We can't say for sure, but we just make that assumption. You'll often, in my emails, if you sign up for our emails, you'll hear me calling them Jeffersons or Jefferson complexes. We're really assuming that they're these hybrids, and they only occur, they're a species of greatest conservation concern in New Hampshire. They only occur at a handful of our crossings, but they're really special when they do. So the light blue flecking is the giveaway there, instead of the yellow spots, the polka dots. As things warm up, we have more and more critters that come out. Some of them are migrating, and many of them are simply out enjoying their warm, rainy night, dispersing, looking for food, that sort of thing. But we do see more and more species as we get further and further in the season. So I'll start with the one at the top, which I'm sure you all recognize. This is when I tell people that I work with salamanders, this is the first species that comes to mind, the bright orange little salamander that you probably have seen roaming around in the woods on rainy summer days. This is our red eft. This is the reason that people think of this salamander first is because this is one of the only salamanders in New Hampshire or New England that is active above ground and during the day when humans are active. Most of the other salamanders are below ground or in streams or at night or all of the above. So we see these little red efts all the time. They are the juvenile form of the eastern newt that you see swimming around in ponds and lakes and beaver wetlands. And so red efts, bright orange, thick skin. They start off in water like most amphibians. They become red efts. They live that life wandering around the woods for 4 to 5 years, sometimes up to 7. And then they undergo another transition where their skin changes to olive green. It thins out so they can absorb oxygen through it better. Their tail changes shape to become a rudder for swimming, and they become semi-aquatic or fully aquatic for the rest of their lives, maybe another 10 years. We don't see a ton of red efts at our crossing sites because they're mostly active during the daytime, but every once in a while we do, and sometimes we see them in their kind of transitional phase when they have just kind of started to look more like the adult newts and are headed to the wetlands. We also sometimes see this one down below, the redback salamander. This is a salamander the size of your pinky. So it's much smaller than the spotteds. And the characteristic there is that it has a rust red stripe running down its back. It also has very tiny legs. This is the most common vertebrate in northeastern forests. There are more redback salamanders than you can think of any animal with a backbone: mice, toads, deer. There are more redback salamanders than any of those. They are the most common. If you turn over 5 logs in the woods, at least one of them will have a redback salamander under it. You also often see them in wood piles, that sort of thing. They are very hard to pick up on big nights. Sometimes we just kind of try to usher them along without moving them by hand like the others. A few other kind of pinky-sized salamanders that you might see. If you're down in Winchester or at a site that is near a swamp, you might encounter this one, the four-toed salamander. They are named that because they have 4 toes on both their front and rear legs, whereas most other salamanders have 4 toes in the front and 5 in the back. I do not recommend that you attempt to count their toes in order to identify them in the field. They are very tiny and hard to see. Instead, you can look at the base of their tail. There's an hourglass shape there. It's very distinctive. And if you flip them over, they won't like it, but they'll let you do it for a minute. You can see a white belly with black flecking. And those are our four-toed salamanders. They occur, they lay their eggs in sphagnum moss. So that we see them typically at sites that are near swamps or wetlands as opposed to vernal pools. Winchester, our Winchester site, Forest Lake Road, gets lots of these. And one last one that is a stream salamander. I don't know what they're doing about on migration nights, but we see them sometimes, is this one. Again, it's pinky sized, yellowish in color. And the distinctive thing here are those 2 long black lines running down their back. And that is the 2-line salamander. We have amphibian ID sheets that you can download from our website. So if you don't remember all of this, you can go and bone up with either our volunteer handbook or our ID sheets. And I will also be doing some pop quizzes later on. So those are our salamanders. We also have frogs that come out as it gets warmer. Some of them are truly migrating for breeding purposes. Others are just out looking for a meal. The first one in the top is perhaps the most adorable frog. It is in our neck of the woods anyway. It's the gray tree frog. So this one, identifying characters, this is a frog that looks like bark, lives on bark, eats insects that live in bark. It is fully adapted for life in the trees, except for when it comes down to migrate to wetlands to breed. And so it's got bumpy skin, grayish or green in color, and it's got those suction cup toes for climbing trees. So those are kind of the ways to see a gray tree, the ways to identify a gray tree frog. Next to that, people often see this frog and think it's a leopard frog because of those spots. Leopard frogs are very uncommon in our part of New Hampshire and in many parts of New England. What we have instead is a pickerel frog. And the way that you can tell that is leopard frogs have round spots, as you might imagine. These have boxy, kind of rectangular spots running down their back. They also have yellow inner thighs during the breeding season. So that's another way that you can sometimes tell them. But really, it's those 2 lines of boxy, dark spots. And then there's 2 frogs down below that look an awful lot like one another. And they are our green frog and our bullfrog. If you find a frog that weighs 5 pounds, it is a bullfrog. There is no other frog in New Hampshire that can grow to that size. But we often see juvenile bullfrogs, smaller, out and about. And so the thing that I look at is their backs. So green frogs have 2 ridges running down their back. They're called dorsolateral ridges. You can see them in this frog. Bullfrogs don't have that. So that's what I always look for. There are other characteristics that other people like to talk about, like the size of that kind of drum behind their eye or the green upper lip. But I think the backs are the easiest way to tell a green frog from a bullfrog. And so that's what I always look for. One last to talk about, a class all its own, the American toad. I'm sure you're familiar with this amphibian from gardens. They are, I think, quite unmistakable. They're stout, they're warty, they're brown or orange. They have a real grumpy look to them. And they hop instead of leap, or sometimes walk. So those are our American toads. They do have a breeding migration later in the season, usually in May. So a few kind of commonly confused species. Both the gray tree frog and the American toad have bumpy skin and might be confused for one another. The differences are American toads are tan or orangey in color, and gray tree frogs are gray or green. American toads sit up really straight and can get quite large. Gray tree frogs tend to crouch, And then if you look at their toes, they have different toes for different lifestyles. So the gray tree frog has those suction cup toes for climbing trees, and the toad has pointy toes for walking around on the ground. Sometimes you might also, there's two species of frogs that climb trees here in New Hampshire, the spring peeper and the gray tree frog. So it's possible you might get those confused because they both have those toe pads, those suction cup toes. But if you look at their skin, spring peepers have smooth skin. It's often tan in color. And gray tree frogs, again, have that really bumpy skin that looks like bark. And tree frogs tan, gray tree frogs gray or green, spring peepers tan or orange. And then lastly, most of the time you can tell a wood frog from a spring peeper pretty easily because adult wood frogs are 2 to 3 times the size of adult spring peepers. But sometimes we see juvenile wood frogs at our sites. And the way that I can tell a juvenile wood frog, which is about the same size as a spring peeper from a peeper, is I look for the bandit's mask, the dark mask behind the eye. That is distinctive for wood frogs at all ages, and spring peepers don't have it. So, after all of that, and you've gone to our website and you've downloaded the ID sheets and you've studied and you see something and you still don't know what it is, like this, which is a picture from our Forest Lake Road crossing a number of years ago, what do? If you're at a site where there's a site coordinator, which we'll talk about in a bit, you can ask them. They've really done some studying and can help ID things for you. If there's not a site coordinator, you can take a picture and send it to me, and I always love to help people identify stuff. This was a salamander that looked really weird. And there was, they took a picture, they sent it to me, and there was lots of discussion. I sent it to a bunch of listservs of people who like reptiles and amphibians and wondered if it was some hybrid, some strange thing. In the end, everybody decided it was just a spotted salamander with very strange spots. Okay, so that's the end of the ID portion. There will be some pop quizzes in here. So now we're going to move into the so what part. Why should we care? Because my hope is that even if you never go out on a rainy night, that you'll still be an advocate for amphibians in your community and be able to talk about why they matter. So we're going to start by talking about the role they play in our forests. So there's a way of measuring the role that different species might play, which is the concept of biomass. And biomass is basically a way to try to compare one group of species with another group of species. And at its simplest form, you take the mass of one individual of a given species and add it to the mass of all the other individuals of that species in a given place and time. So for instance, if I wanted to take the biomass of human beings in the Harris Center building on a Monday, I would add my mass to Nate's mass, to Susie Spickle's mass, all the different people, all the visitors and staffers, and I'd get a number. And then if I wanted to compare that to the biomass of mice or ants in that building, I would do the same thing. And then the comparison might surprise me because mice and ants are obviously much smaller than people, but they tend to be much more numerous. And so biologists did this in the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest in New Hampshire in the 70s. And they found that the biomass of redback salamanders, that one species, was greater than twice the biomass of all the bird species combined during peak bird breeding season. So one species of salamander compared to all the birds. And new research is finding that those salamander figures were probably underestimates because they would go so deep below the forest floor that it was hard for the scientists to find them all. So what does that tell us? It tells us that there is an incredible amount of energy moving through our forests in the bodies of salamanders and other amphibians. And that comes to play most prominently in the food web. They are an incredibly important food source for herons and owls and foxes and turtles and snakes and coyotes and you name it. They are also, this is a figure that just, here's a pop quiz. What species is this? Anyone put a guess in the chat? It's a tricky one. Yeah, so it's tricky. It's small in size, so you might think it's a peeper, but it's got the dark bandit mask behind its eye. And so that's a clue that it's a wood frog. It just happens to be a juvenile wood frog that was hatched in a vernal pool. It is not uncommon for a small vernal pool to produce more than 10,000 of these froglets. And if they're lucky, 10 will make it to adulthood. The rest are food. They're also incredibly important predators. So the average American toad eats 3 times its body weight in insects every day in the summer. It can be up to 10,000 insects and invertebrates in a growing season. Spotted salamander larvae are voracious predators of mosquito larvae. So they do play a really important role in helping energy move throughout the ecosystem and also in kind of helping keep insect populations in check. There's also been some interesting research looking at the role that they might help play in carbon sequestration. New York Times reported on this study a bunch of years ago and called them the climate change heroes of the forest. And that, I think, remains to be seen, but it's an interesting idea to think about. So woodland salamanders typically eat a group of invertebrates that are collectively called shredders. These are the insects and other invertebrates that shred dry leaves. And when they do that, a little bit of the carbon in those leaves is released into the atmosphere. When those leaves are not shredded and eaten by these insects, they get buried by other leaves and kind of slowly decompose, and their carbon is absorbed into the soil. And so there has been some experimental studies where they found that the more salamanders you have, the fewer shredders you have. And the fewer shredders you have, the more carbon is sunk into the soil instead of released into the atmosphere. And they actually quantified this with numbers. And so having healthy salamander populations may play a role in carbon storage. They are also incredibly sensitive to environmental change. And so we can learn a lot from watching them. Amphibians have porous skin, so they're sensitive to toxins, pollutants in the environment. And if we pay attention to them, it can be a clue of other things that might be affecting more than just amphibians. This is a map from a recent assessment that came out in 2023, a global amphibian assessment, where they looked at all of the amphibian species in the world, and they found that worldwide 41% of amphibian species are threatened with extinction. For salamanders, that number is actually 60% of salamander species. This map shows the red spots are places where 50 to 60 species are threatened with extinction in those locations. This is 2 to 3 times the amount of species we have in New Hampshire as a whole. There are places where there are that many species that are threatened, largely from habitat loss, also disease, pollutants. But we happen to live in an area where things are still pretty good for amphibians. And so we have an opportunity to keep common species common. And that's part of what we're hoping to do here. And that brings me to the other piece of the so what, which is road mortality or roadkill. So if I ask you, what is the first animal you think of when someone says roadkill? Throw some animals in the chat. What kind of animals do you think of when you think of roadkill? Does anyone? Hawks, raccoons, squirrels. I often hear squirrels, skunks, deer, possum. So these are large-bodied animals that tend to get hit one at a time, and their bodies kind of stay on the road for a while, so we see them. All of the research on road ecology is showing that despite the fact that we see deer and squirrels and skunks more often, that road kill is most greatly impacting reptiles and amphibians. One study in Indiana found that 95% of the vertebrates that they found as roadkill were reptiles and amphibians. Part of the reason for that is that on these migration nights, these amphibians are out on the road by the hundreds or thousands. So on a night like that, it does not take a lot of cars to do a lot of damage. There was a really jaw-dropping study out of Canada. They looked at a 2-mile stretch of road over 4 seasons and counted 30,000 dead amphibians just on those 2 miles. Studies in both New York and Vermont found more than 50% of the salamanders who tried to cross a paved rural road, just like the roads many of us drive every day, did not make it. Another study in Massachusetts found that they could lose their spotted salamander populations just due to roadkill in as few as 25 years. It's a really big deal. And it's largely invisible to us because it's happening at night. They're small and they're soft-bodied. And so by morning, they're either crushed beyond recognition and we're not seeing them, or they've been scavenged by crows or owls or foxes. And so for a long time, this was an invisible problem, but more and more people are seeing it now. And if you go out on these migration nights, you'll see it too. Not all roads are created equal. Roads near water is where this is happening. And so if you have an option, even if you decide that going out in the rain is not your thing and you don't want to go out on 45-degree rainy night, you can help frogs and salamanders simply by not driving on rainy spring nights, and particularly not driving on roads near water, because that's where they're going to be. And traffic volume matters too. So major highways, they might have had amphibians there once upon a time, but probably don't anymore. And a really small dirt roads don't have enough traffic for it to be a big issue. It's these kind of paved rural roads, that middle of the road kind of, between big highways and small dirt roads. That's where the biggest challenges are. Oh, I have a pop quiz for you. What species is this? I hope you can get this one. What do we got in this frame here? I don't see anyone chiming in the chat. All right, good. There you go. Spotted salamander. Yes, polka dots. So that was the sad part and the depressing part. This is the happier and more hopeful part. There are solutions, and we know that they work. One of them is amphibian tunnels. These are the best solution because they are available at all times of year. So not just for the adult salamanders going into their breeding pools, but also for the young who are leaving later in the summer. They're available all night long, on any night, even if a person hasn't gone out there to look for them. This is a picture from a really wonderful project in Vermont, Moncton, Vermont. After 10 years of data collection and planning and fundraising, they put in 2 tunnels and curbing to guide the amphibians to those tunnels. And this doesn't look like much, but this is exciting because this is a trail cam photo of the very first spotted salamander documented using those tunnels after they went in 2016. And that season, they counted on their trail cam photos 2,200 amphibians crossing just between March and early May. So they worked really well. And now they've done a 5-year study and found that it reduced road mortality by 93% at that site. It's amazing. It was also a really expensive project. It cost $300,000. So it's not possible for every crossing site to have a tunnel. And that's where we come to a less expensive solution. It's less effective because it relies on people accurately predicting the migration, which relies on the weather forecast not changing too much. And we can't usually close the roads for every migration night, but it can help quite a bit. This is a picture from Beekman Road in East Brunswick, New Jersey. There are also roads closed for salamanders and toads and frogs in a neighborhood in Philadelphia, if you can believe it, in a place in Michigan, and now, because of our project, in Keene, New Hampshire. So this is also a really good option. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But before anybody can close a road for salamanders or think about a tunnel, we need to have information about where these crossings are happening, which species are involved, how many are involved, because it probably doesn't make sense to close a road for 10 frogs if there's 10 frogs moving in a night, but it might make sense to close a road if there's 1,000 frogs in a night. And so this is where we all come in. This is where the Salamander Brigades come in, is to help collect some of this data that we can use to make some of these decisions down the road. And so we're going to talk now about the Salamander Brigades, how they work, and the goals of the project. So there's 3 goals. One is to simply reduce roadkill associated with the migration. The next is to collect data that can help inform land protection and road improvements for wildlife, like closures or tunnels. And the third is to increase public support for amphibian conservation, for help people learn about these amazing animals, take pride in what's happening in their backyards. You know, we hear migration and we tend to think about birds flying to South America and back, or caribou in the Arctic, but we have an incredible migration happening right here in our own backyards. And for a long time, not a lot of people knew about it. So what do the Salamander Brigades do? What are you going to do if you choose to join us? This is divided into 2 timeframes: before the big nights and on the big nights. Before the big nights, you attend a training. Congratulations, you have already done this step. You are there. After that, you're staying on call, waiting for big nights to happen. How will you find out when a migration night might be upon us? The first is that you can sign up for our email list. So after tonight, if you want to be added to our email list and you want to volunteer, you can come to our website. There's a button on our volunteer materials page that says sign up to volunteer. I don't assume that everyone from Maine and California and New York and Massachusetts who are on the Zoom tonight necessarily want to volunteer with our project. And so I'm not going to sign you up automatically. You'll have to sign yourself up if you want to get our emails. But we send an email out when we think migrations are likely. I don't want to send a million emails to you. And so I also keep a 5-day salamander forecast on the Harris Center website. So anytime you haven't heard from me and you're wondering if the weather looks good, you can check the forecast. It's updated daily during salamander season. And maybe Nate can put the salamander forecast link in the Zoom there. And then, of course, you can just watch the weather. You know what to look for now. You can just keep your own eye on the weather and figure out in your location, because often we have, it's so site specific with temperature and rainfall and whether the ground is thawed or not, that even here in the Monadnock region, we frequently in the early part of the season have a migration in Keene and no migration in Peterborough yet. Later in the season, Hancock might still have a migration going and Keene will be done for the year. It's all really tied to specific site conditions. So learning to kind of look at your local site is really important. Another thing that you can do while you wait is get your gear together. I have my amphibian go bag by my door. And here is what is in that. Oh, pop quiz. Here's another one. What species is this? It's anyone? Thank you. Thank you, Nina. Wood frog. Yes. Dark mass behind the eye. Okay. The first thing that you need when you go out is a reflective vest. This is so important that if you do not have a reflective vest or cannot find the reflective vest that you do have, you should not go out that night. You should stay home. It is essential for cars being able to see you that you wear a reflective vest. You can usually find them really inexpensively at hardware stores or sporting goods stores or the internet. They usually cost about 10 bucks. If you are local and if cost is a problem for you or is prohibitive for you, if that is something that was going to prevent you from going out, the Harris Center has vests that you can borrow and you can email Nate or I and we can get those to you. But do not go out without a reflective vest. Rain gear. It will be raining. That's the whole thing about Big Night. And you will be much more comfortable if you have rain jacket and rain pants on. And also warm layers. So we call these the first warm rainy nights of spring. But warm to a wood frog who can literally freeze solid and survive is not the same thing as warm to a human being. And 43-degree rain can get pretty chilly after you've been out for a couple of hours. So bundle up. Bright lights. Your cell phone is not enough. Do not try to go out on a big night with only a cell phone flashlight. You will not be able to see frogs until they are right underfoot, and even then you might not see them. Flashlights are best because you can direct the beam. Headlamps are also really great for looking at data forms and for having being more visible to cars. I go out with both. You also do not want to grab the flashlight out of your kitchen drawer that's been sitting there for a year and a half unused because those batteries will probably die pretty soon. So charge them up, replace the batteries. Maybe you want to bring extra batteries with you. Data forms, for keeping count. If you go to a site that has a site coordinator, we have about 10 sites where we actively coordinate volunteer efforts. And we have these kind of super volunteers who go out and they put up signs and cones and they have they have reflective vests on that say the Harris Center on the back and reflective lettering. If you're at one of those sites and you can get downloadable information sheets for each one of those sites on our website on the Crossing Sites page, there may be people there with a data form to hand to you, and there'll be a data form on Write in the Rain paper, which is designed not to fall apart when it gets soaking wet. Those Write in the Rain paper forms, you cannot write on them with pen. It will not work. And in general, even with regular paper, pencil is better when things are wet. So bring a pencil. And if you aren't going to a site that we are likely to have a site coordinator, usually in the Salamander forecast, we'll list which sites will have site coordinators on a given night. If you're just going out on your own, you can print data forms out from our website. Clipboard, something to lean on. It's really great to work as a team where one person is moving amphibians and the other person is collecting the data. Camera or phone, you are obviously going to want to take pictures because these are amazing animals and you're going to want to take pictures and share them with everyone you know. We have also a button on the Harris Center website where you can submit photos to us. If you do that, we will share them with the whole salamander community on our website and social media and in emails. We love to see and share photos of amphibians and people out there having fun on big nights. The last two things are optional. I don't carry them myself, but some people like to. The first is a bucket, and that is because at some sites, on some nights, there are so many amphibians that it is more efficient to load half a dozen or a dozen or more into a bucket and move them across the road all at the same time than it is to go one at a time. Glebe Road in Westmoreland is a site where people often use buckets. There are so many critters there. So that's a happy thing to bring. The other one is a less happy thing. We do count the live animals and we also count the dead animals. You don't have to do that. If you don't, that's really up to you. Some people choose to just ignore the dead, and I understand it's hard to see. But if you do count the dead ones, we ask that you remove them from the road. And that's so that we don't have 5 people walking past the same dead wood frog and think that we have 5 dead wood frogs when we really only had 1. And so you can remove them from the road simply by picking them up with your fingers and placing them off the road. That's what I do. Some people don't like to touch the dead ones, and so they bring a scoop or a spatula to kind of just move things off the road as needed. Okay, that's your gear. There's a list of it in our volunteer handbook too, in case you didn't take notes. On the big nights, people, what do we do then? We go out to crossing sites. I'll talk about how to find out where to go in a minute. When you get there, we are moving amphibians across the road by hand. We used to call ourselves the Salamander Crossing Guards, and we rebranded because crossing guards stop traffic, and we do not do that. It is not safe for us to do that. Our goal is simply to move these animals across the road faster than they can move themselves, and so therefore to prevent them getting hit that way. And so when you get to a site on a big night, you get settled in, you're checking in with a site coordinator if there is one, getting your data forms, making sure you got your vest on, your flashlight, and you're basically walking back and forth down the road at that site, scanning with your flashlight for amphibians. What you're looking for is a stick with one end upturned. That is a salamander. Sometimes it's a wiggly stick, or a little rock that is maybe triangular in shape with one point. That is a frog. So when you see one, you're going to go and you're going to pick it up. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. I'll talk about it right now. Handling amphibians. I get a lot of questions about this because people have heard that it is not safe to handle amphibians with your bare hands, that the oils on your hands will harm them. This is a myth. However, there are lots of things that we put on our hands that can harm them. And that is what is important to consider. So you have to before you choose to handle amphibians, make sure your hands are clean, wet, and free of toxins. What do I mean by toxins? Bug spray, perfume, soap, hand sanitizer is extremely bad for amphibians. So you don't want any chemicals on your skin. You just want to kind of wash them before you go out with soap and water, wash them again when you get back. Some people will just stick their hands in a puddle when they get to their crossing site and know that they're wet, and kind of water from on site. Some people also use gloves, and that's fine too. You can use those nitrile gloves, just non-powdered, if you prefer to use gloves. You're going to hold them around the center of their bodies, not by their legs or their tails. That can harm them. And then I can't believe I have to say this, but I do, because a few years ago, I had someone who was hoping that he could kind of give them some tough love and encourage them to stay away from the road by kind of tossing them after they crossed. And that is obviously not something you want to do. They need to cross these roads to live their lives, and we just want to help them across. So release them very gently. Okay, so that's that. As you go, you're keeping count by species and by live versus dead. This is what the data forms look like that you can download on our website to bring out with you. There's some basic weather data, start time, end time, and then just tally marks, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 5th one you kind of go across, and then you can count up easily at the end of the night. And then there's room for notes. It's really helpful to work as a team with one person recording data and another person moving the critters. The end of the night, we really want you to report your data. If you don't report your counts to us, we cannot use them for conservation outcomes in the end. And we also can't share them with everyone. So we send out a field report to everyone who's on our email list and post it on our website after each big migration night, so you can see what all of the people did all around the Monadnock region. We do only include Monadnock region, or I should say Southwest New Hampshire sites in those reports, because we're a regional organization and we can't manage data from everywhere in New Hampshire. But if you report your data to us within my recommendation is that you do it as soon as you get home or over your coffee the next morning. If you wait longer than that, it can be hard to remember to send it in. And the longer we wait, the longer it takes us to kind of summarize all that data and get reports back out to you. But this is the way that we can make a difference down the road, is by sending your data in to us so that we can share it with people like conservation commissions, town planners, road agents, New Hampshire Fish and Game, that sort of thing. So about sharing your data. If you're at a site with a site coordinator, those are the persons with the vest that says Harris Center and reflective lettering. Those are the sites where they'll see salamander crossing signs like what I got back here, or cones. If they're there and they handed you a data form or you checked in with them at the beginning of the night, you can just give your counts to them before you leave, and they will collate everything from that site and submit it on your behalf, so you don't have to think about it. If you are at a site without a site coordinator or they have left before you, you can go to our website. We have a button for submit counts. We have a button for submit photos. And those go straight to us, much better than email submissions, because they all get kind of put into a central spot where Nate and I can work with them. You can also use report in iNaturalist, yes. And you can do that in Southwest New Hampshire too. I see that Greg made a comment there. And then the last and most important thing, truly the reason we have these trainings, is to stay safe and to talk about safety. It is the most important part. So this is the time to pay the closest attention, because this is the most important part if you choose to go out at night. Here's how to stay safe. Wear a reflective vest. First and foremost, I have already told you this. I'm going to tell you 5 more times. It is so important to wear a reflective vest so that you can be visible. This is a great example. Some of my interns a bunch of years ago, could you see them? If they were not wearing reflective vests, you could not see them. It is really important to be visible to cars. That's the first thing. Next is that we've already talked about shining a bright light. The bright lights help you see critters. They also help cars see you. So if you only have one, or you're going to go buy a new light for yourself, pick a flashlight, because that's the best for looking for critters. If you have the option, a headlamp together with a flashlight is really great. And some people also put light up vests on, if you're a runner and you've got one of those light up vests for being seen, that's awesome. That's really great too. You're staying alert. You are on roads where cars are coming through at night when they may not be expecting to see pedestrians in the road. Driving visibility may be poor because it will be raining likely, or it might be foggy. So you are always looking and listening for cars. And kind of like at least when I was a kid and we were playing in the street and somebody heard or saw a car coming, and you yell, "Car!" And then everybody moves off the road who is there with you, and you wait for that car to pass by. Everybody is responsible together for keeping eyes and ears out for cars and making sure that everyone at your site is alert and staying safe. I also recommend when you're walking up and down that you walk in the lane facing traffic so that you can see cars as they're coming and they can see you better. So instead of walking, so it means kind of walking in the left-hand lane. If you're heading up, it's basically walking in the left-hand lane. So you want to face traffic. And when a car is coming, you need to step off the road. This sounds obvious. It is not that obvious. When you're out there, you're really absorbed and engrossed in the moment and you're looking at an animal. You might get distracted and you might not be thinking about that, but you need to be thinking about that. You don't want to stop traffic. I've already said that. Don't shine your lights at those cars, even if you're really mad because you know that they saw you and they just sped right up and you want to teach them a lesson. Not safe. You do not want to shine your lights at a car. It could hit a driver's eyes. It could cause them to not be able to see well. I often will shine my light at the ground or even at myself to make my reflective vest really pop. This last one, it sounds obvious, but I'm going to tell you the scenario in which this might happen. So if you go out and do this, maybe you will see a spotted salamander for the first time and you will fall madly in love with that salamander. You will just be in awe of its beauty. And then there will be more on the road and you will just be really excited to see them all. And there's going to come a time when you are being alert to traffic, you're stepping aside and you're looking in the road because the car's headlights are brighter than any flashlight or headlamp that you have. And so you're using that light to see what's in the road. And you might see a spotted salamander or a wood frog in illuminated in those lights. And your first thought in your head is going to be, I can run out there really quick and grab it before the car comes. I want the second thing that you hear in your head to be my voice saying, don't do that. Do not do that. It is extremely easy to slip. I don't recommend running ever at a crossing site because it's wet roads. It's easy to slip and fall. It's also easy for a salamander to slide out of your hand when you're rushing. So you just need to step aside and hope for the best, let the car pass, and then go tend to the salamander. You have to put your own safety first. You cannot risk your life here. A few special instructions for families. So I always hear from families who want to do this with their kids, and it is truly a transformative experience for young people. And it can be amazing, but you have to take really special care because it is not an inherently safe activity to be on a road at night when drivers may not be expecting you to be there. So I recommend that the very youngest among us wait until they're elementary school aged before they come out. The one exception is North Lincoln Street in Keene when that road is closed, which we'll talk about, because then it's a safer place for very young people, for elders, for folks who might move slower, or just that when that road is closed, you can bring young children. Otherwise, I say wait till elementary school or older. Find a family-friendly crossing. Do some research ahead of time. We have information on crossing sites on our website, and we say whether, if we know it, we say whether they're family-friendly or not. What do I mean by that? Slower traffic, wider shoulders or sidewalks, streetlights. Make sure everyone in your party is wearing a reflective vest. Just having a reflective vest on the child or the parent is not enough. Everybody needs one to be visible. And I recommend, if you can, a 1-to-1 ratio, one adult for each child, and the responsibility of that adult is the child in their care. And if you are someone who has a lot of young kids in your family, enlist aunts, uncles, friends to come out with you. That way, everybody is staying safe. And it's just really hard for one adult to wrangle 3 or 4 super excited young kids who are really stoked to see these frogs everywhere and might not be thinking of their own safety and traffic. So if you can, 1-to-1 is great. I just want to mention for folks who might do this in future years, I've been mentioning site coordinators. We always need help with this task. And so if you do this season and then you really like it and you want to come back and help in an even bigger way, for about a dozen of our sites, we try to line up multiple site coordinators each year. These are folks who try to stick around for most of the migration season. We try to have multiple coordinators for each site. So if one person is out of town, other people can handle it. They're the ones that they familiarize themselves with the crossing site, where to park, where the amphibians are likely to be found, which species are there. We loan them field equipment for the season, salamander crossing signs, traffic cones, data forms, reflective vests. So they put that out at the beginning of the night, pull it in at the end of the night, keep it for the season. Orient volunteers to each site so you can go check in with them and let them know when you're leaving. They can answer any questions, give you data forms, help you identify amphibians. And then at the end of the night, they collect all their forms, all the data from that one site, and submit it all together to us to make sure we get it. So just think about it if this is something you decide you really like to do. We're always looking for site coordinators. It's best to have at least 1 year under your belt at a particular site so you can know it well before stepping into this role. Okay. Oh, here's a pop quiz. What are the salamanders in this person's hand? I have not asked you about this species yet. So these are gray salamanders. They have light blue flecking. Yeah. Yes, these are Jefferson complex salamanders. Good. And there is a spotted, somebody you're saying spotted, there is a spotted on the ground crawling underneath that person's hand. So already shared a lot about what to expect on big nights, but some of the other questions that I get are, when do you go out? How long do you have to stay? So this is the most non-committal volunteer commitment you'll ever make, in that you come out if you can and you stay as long as you like. We know, because the migration can't be predicted very far in advance, that it can be hard to arrange your schedule around it. And so some nights it works for you and some nights it doesn't. And some people stay for an hour and others stay for 4 or 5 hours. The migration won't really get going until about a half an hour after sunset, if conditions are right. It's all related to the conditions. So if the rain hasn't started yet, or the temperature. Often we'll have a migration the beginning of part of the night, and then the temperature will drop into the 30s and it'll all slow down. Or maybe it rained during the day and we'll have a migration early on wet ground, and then as the ground dries up, so will the amphibian movement. But if the conditions are right, they'll migrate all night long. We do not expect you to be out all night long, but you can stay as long as you can and as long as you like to. We have some people, graduate students, coffee drinkers who, go out at 2 a.m. We have one person who likes to go out pre-dawn hours. Most people go out around 7:30 or 8 and stay till around 10 or 10:30 or 11. And I think I've shared most of what else to expect, but if there's other questions that have come up in the chat, we can get to them later. And again, in terms of seasonality, typically mid-March through early May. We have already had our first migrations of this year because we had no snowpack and the ground thawed early and it was really warm. But the best are still yet to come. We haven't had any truly big nights. You haven't missed anything yet. So yeah. This is a really old picture. This is Andrew. I love to share it even though it's old because I feel like, his reflective vest, there's brighter vests available these days, but I just love him because this picture of him, because he's got like all the things that I've just been telling you all together. So of course, first and foremost, he is wearing a reflective vest. He's got 2 sources of light. He's got his headlamp, he's got his flashlight. Like me, he wears glasses to see. And so he knows that he needs a hat with a brim to keep the rain off of the glasses so he can stay alert to traffic and see. He's got his pencil clipped right there to his vest, ready to write down his data forms. He's got a peeper in his hand. His rain jacket also looks like it has some reflective fabric on it. And then most importantly, aside from the reflective vest and the flashlight, he's smiling. He is happy. He's having a good time. If you are not smiling anymore, it is time to go home. If you're cold, if you're tired, it's okay to go home. You don't have to stay out past your bedtime. This is, where every moment that we're out there, we're making a difference and helping. And when you've reached your limit for the night, call it a night. So crossing sites. I think Nate may have already put this in the chat, but I'll put it there too. And I'll also send this out in an email when we send out the YouTube link with the recording. So we have a map of crossing sites on our website. If you go there, it's interactive. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can click on any one of those buttons and information will pop up. So the yellow sites are the ones where we try to have site coordinators, where you're most likely to find other volunteers. You're very likely to find amphibians if conditions are good, and we have a lot of information about those sites. We have downloadable info sheets for each of them with information on parking and directions and what to expect, whether it's family friendly or not. All those green frogs are sites that they're a different category. And so I've been doing this project, this is my 18th season with the Salamander Brigades. And a few years after we got started, people started to hear about us and they were really excited and they wanted to come and join us. And they said, I was getting calls and emails and they said, I live 2 hours from Keene, but I don't care. I will come. I want to be part of this. And at that time, we were only having sites with site coordinators. And I thought, this is all wrong. The last thing that any of us should be doing on these nights is driving long distances. How many amphibians are we accidentally hitting on our way to help other amphibians? And so we kind of moved into a more decentralized model where I encourage people to find crossings that are close to home. You might not have signs, you might not have cones, you might not have a site coordinator, but you will have hopefully a place that you can go to with friends and neighbors that is close for you. And so those green frogs are other sites that have been reported to us. Some of them have the same families and groups of friends and neighbors going to them year after year, and we have lots of information. Other sites, somebody might have said, hey, Brett, I saw a spotted salamander on Mill Street the other night. And then they never answered my other questions about it, and that's all I had. But I put all of them on the map because my hope is to help people find places that are close to them. And so that's all those green frogs. They're sites that are kind of grassroots efforts, small groups of friends or family, or places where we have a little bit of information, but not a lot of information, and where you can help collect more information. All that we know about each of these sites is listed when you hit when you hit those buttons, it'll pop up in a box. And this is the one thing where we do share information from throughout the state. Even though we only really manage data and coordinate volunteer activities in Southwest New Hampshire, there's a few sites that are grandfathered in Concord and Springfield, Vermont and such, but we're the only one doing this in New Hampshire at this scale. And so we often hear from people in other parts of the state that want to go out and want to know about crossings near them. And so we will add any crossing in New Hampshire to this map. We have, if you go out and find one that's not on this map, we have a button, we have data forms just for that with information on the site, whether it has streetlights, whether it has shoulders, what the speed limit is there. And then we will add those sites to the map at the end of the season. So you can, or if you go to one of these sites and there's not a lot of information there's a lot of ones that say, we received a report of amphibians crossing Page Road, but we don't know exactly where. If you go out and you find exactly where, let us know and we'll update that. Remember that these animals, actually, I didn't share this part. These animals are returning to the same sites year after year. So they have really strong site fidelity, attachment to their breeding sites. So in many cases, it's the wetland where they themselves hatched from an egg. They're going back again and again. Spotted salamanders, as I said, they can live more than 20 years. They don't even start breeding until they're 3 to 5 years old. So this is how we know that crossing sites they're not random. There are patterns on the landscape because these animals are returning year after year. And if you saw wood frogs there this spring, you'll probably see them there next spring too. And that's how we have populated this map. And so there are some sites there on the seacoast, in the North Country, in the Upper Valley, and we're happy to add more as they come in. There's about 175 sites on that map right now, and we're always happy to add more. So if there aren't any crossings near you, here's a pop quiz. What species is this? This is a stout. Yeah, Nina's got it. American toad, stout, warty, grumpy. So if there aren't any crossings near you on our map, you can go out on these same nights that everybody else is going out and do a survey, look for crossings. The first place to look is to think about your town and think about the most crossings occur where there is a wooded hillside on one side of the road and a wetland or vernal pool or other water body on another. Think about your town. Where are those sites in your town? Go there, check them out when conditions are right for migration. Roads near water, particularly roads with woods on the other side of the water. You can also check iNaturalist for spotted salamander or wood frog sightings that are near roads. iNaturalist is a community science platform where people report sightings of any living thing, but you can sort if you want. At iNaturalist.org, you can look specifically for spotted salamanders or wood frogs. There's also an app. You can also report your sightings there. When you're going out looking, so you're going to pick a few sites ahead of time, do a little research on iNaturalist or just by thinking about the landscape, and you're going to say, where's the best place for me to check out? And then you're going to get yourself geared up, just like everybody else, reflective vests, lights, everything. And you're going to go to those places and drive really slowly, like no more than 15 miles an hour. Put your blinkers on, let people pass you by. You can roll down your windows and listen. You might hear wood frogs quacking or peepers peeping. That might be a sign that you're nearing a crossing. You're scanning the whole road. And you're not just looking for living frogs, because if there's no salamander brigades out there, there's a really good chance that the sign you're nearing a crossing is dead amphibians in the road. Because if nobody's there to help them, that will happen. And also they stay on the road longer than the living ones who are moving across. So you're looking for both live and dead amphibians. If you see them, you see a spot that looks promising, pull over, park safely. Do not park in anyone's driveway or in front of their house. That can make them nervous, understandably so. And if you're ready, geared up, bring your data form and go out there and check it out. Spend 10, 15, 20 minutes there. If there's a lot of critters, spend the whole night there. If there's not a lot of critters, go check out your next site. So we've got data forms specifically for scouting new sites that you can download on our website. The front page is just location information. The back page is the same as the other form, basically. And one form per site. And then you can upload all of that through the forms on our website electronically. Okay, so just a couple more things before we can kind of turn to questions. One is a special project that is at just a few of our sites that's fun to talk about and share with you. And this is focused on spotted salamanders and their spot patterns. So spotted salamanders have spot patterns that are unique to individual, kind of like fingerprints. So that salamander will have that same spot pattern for its whole life. And so if we take pictures of them and compare them to pictures from past years at that same site, we can start to see whether we're seeing the same salamanders come again and again. And our hope is that over time, this can be a data set that can help us learn about survivorship in populations where they have to cross a road. So here's an example. This is from the first year we started the project. This is a salamander that we saw in its inbound migration to the wetland on April 15th, on its way out on May 1st. How do we know it's the same one? Well, we'll start with these two spots that are really far apart on the left side. Then look at these at the by the rear right leg that are attached together. Then we look at the head. It's got that kind of constellation of 3 at the back. This is how we do it to try to match them up. So we're backlogged by a few years because the more pictures we get, the more time this takes. But as of a few years ago, we had identified 35 individual salamanders that had been encountered on at least 2 different occasions at North Lincoln Street. 24 of them had been encountered in 2 or more years, not necessarily consecutively. So this one was 3 years in a row, and it is consecutive, but they're not all. We had one individual salamander who was moved across North Lincoln Street by our crossing brigades 5 years in a row, which is amazing. And we only know that because of the spot pattern records. So if you, we only are collecting these from a small subset of sites because we just can't manage data from every single site. But if you want to help with this project, first thing is it's only spotted salamanders. I've heard that toads have unique wart patterns, but we are not about to try to match those up based on photos. So spotted is it for this. You can submit photos of any species and of all of your friends and you out on the road through our website, and we love to see and share those photos. But for this particular project, just spotted salamanders, and only from 5 crossings. You can do this on your own if you want at the crossing close to home and keep your own records. We're only keeping records from Jordan Road in Keene and North Lincoln Street in Keene, Swansea Lake Road, Matthews Road in Swansea, and Nelson Road in Nelson. And the reason for this is that these are the sites where we have the best records going back, and where we've yet to get a recapture, a matching salamander at the Swansea sites, but we have at least one at each of the others. So you really want to photograph the head and back from above and make sure both sides of the salamander are visible so we can see the full spot pattern. So pictures like that on the left, they're beautiful. Great to send them in just for fun and for beauty shots. No good for spot pattern records. This is what we want for spot pattern records. And then when you send these in, we need some information from you to make it. This is what changes a photograph into data. We need the date. We need the site. And if you're really interested in data management and want to help us out, you can also assign a unique number. So you could send one picture of each salamander, and you can, we'll do this for you. If all you give us is the date and the site, we can make it work. One picture per salamander, but what we do is we rename them by the site, the date, and then a number. So the first salamander at Jordan Road on April 15, 2018 was 01. The next one is 02. So if you want to, you know, if you're a graduate student or just someone who's like into data and you want to rename your files, that helps us out, but you don't have to. So successes of this project, just a few things to kind of feel good about before we take questions. We have now crossed more than 75,000 amphibians since 2007. This, of course, some of these are the same individuals as we know from the spot pattern project. So this represents 75,000 crossings, not necessarily 75,000 individuals, but 75,000 chances to breed. Also, just a little note about the data. Every year I hear from people who say, how does this site compare to that site? And how does this year compare to that year? And those are really hard questions for us to answer with this data. So you could have the exact same number of salamanders at 2 different sites. And if at one site you have 2 people looking and another site you have 20 people, it makes sense that the site with 20 people would count more salamanders because there's more people looking. And so site by site comparisons can be hard. Also, we know we're not out all night, and there are some years when most of the rain happens after midnight, and people aren't out there counting. So our counts are low. It does not mean that the amphibian populations are low or that they're not migrating. It just means that we don't have records. And so if we really wanted, this is a picture of what we would do if we really wanted that information to year, population sizes, how things are changing. We would set up what's called a pitfall array, which is a fence essentially. And then when salamanders and frogs are trying to get where they're going, they hit that fence and they can't get where they're going, and they walk along the fence until they fall into a trap, which is what we have here on the right. That's a can. That is a pitfall trap with some salamanders in it. And then in order to keep the salamanders safe, you have to check those traps. And so you need to pay graduate students or undergraduate students to drink coffee and stay up very late at night and check those traps very frequently. And then also maybe in the daytime too. And we did this once at North Lincoln Street, and it was extremely labor intensive, and it's just not the kind of science we're doing. We can't really maintain that. So I can't really tell you how this year compares to that year, or how this site compares to that site. But I really feel strongly that the numbers tell a story that words can't tell. The numbers are important. The counts are important. And here's an example of that. This is a picture from 2008 already. It's a long time ago. This is what our North Lincoln Street site used to look like. There used to be woods here. And one day the woods were gone and the sign for sale sign was up. And the Keene Conservation Commission was reviewing a proposal to put some houses here. And they had heard about our project. It was really in its infancy then. We'd only been out there a few years, and they called me up and they said, well, is this an important site for amphibians? How does it compare to other sites? And I said, well, I can't really tell you that for all the reasons I've just explained, but I can tell you that it happened to be in April. I said just the other night, 25 volunteers were out there for 4 hours. They moved 838 frogs across the road, and they were all going onto that property, to the wetland behind it. So 838 frogs in 4 hours tells a story about the importance of that site. If I had said there's a lot of frogs there, what's a lot? Is it 10? Is it 100? Is it 1,000? And not only do we have the numbers of the amphibians, but we have the numbers of people who care enough about amphibians to go out in 45-degree rain and move them across the road. And those numbers are just as important for conservation outcomes as the other data. And so this is why we're collecting the data. The numbers matter. And then 10 years later at that site, we worked with the city to start implementing road closures on big nights. And this was an interesting thing too, because when right around the time that this happened, there was speed humps were put in there. And there was actually one of our volunteers circulated a petition to turn those speed humps into tunnels. And it's more complicated than that. It didn't quite work, but the city invited me to come and talk to them about what was going on out there with amphibians. And I said, you know, tunnels are expensive, but road closures are not. And they were very polite. It was just me there with them and a year or two of data. And they were very polite, and they smiled and they said, great presentation. Thank you. And that was the end of that. 10 years later, we went back. Another volunteer connected us to someone in the DPW. We went back. We had 10 years of data, and we had a room full of Salamander Crossing volunteers who showed up in their reflective vests. They didn't even have to say anything. They just showed up in their vests to show support for the road closures. They came to city council meetings, and that was how the roads started to get closed in Keene. So we work with the city on this now. It's part of regular operations at North Lincoln Street. It's closed to all traffic all night long on these nights. At Jordan Road, there was no reasonable detour that we could close the road completely and people could still get to their homes. So that is only closed to through traffic and is not a place for families to come. But, you know, and this is fallible. It relies on me to tell the city when to close the road. And sometimes the weather forecast changes and I can't always predict it right. But it certainly is making a difference for amphibians and for people, because it's become a really amazing place to come on migration nights and have a sense of community and to come out and see the frogs, and a source of pride for Keene. So I'm going to leave you with a few homework assignments, and then Nate can maybe relay some questions to me after that. So some homework assignments for you. Go to I will send out a link either tomorrow or Monday, depending on how long it takes us to get this recording on YouTube. I will send out an email with a link to the recording, and it will also include some links to things on our website. One is our volunteer materials page. that page has a button that says sign up to volunteer. If you want to be added to our email list, you got to go fill that out, because I'm not going to assume that everyone who comes here tonight wants to get emails from us for Keene, New Hampshire, especially if you're living in California. You're welcome to join our email list. You don't have to live here to be on that list, and you don't have to commit to volunteering. It doesn't commit you to anything, but we do want you to kind of opt in if you would like to do this. We have a liability waiver to fill out. It takes just a minute. Just have to ask you to do that. It's online as well. We have a volunteer handbook there that's downloadable. It's got amphibian ID sheets. It's got all the stuff that I maybe forgot tonight. I don't think there's too much I forgot, but you know, it happens. And so all the really important stuff is in the volunteer handbook. It's full of great pictures. I encourage you to just read it. It's downloadable there. There's also a link to a video on that website called Nature Minute. This is a video from New Jersey that does such a great job of showing what it's like on the road on a migration night. It shows kind of, you know, we might all have different ideas of what, based on what I've said about what it's like out there, but this video really shows, you know, the pace that amphibians are moving. It shows good techniques for picking them up and moving them across the road, which is a hard thing for me to demonstrate on a Zoom. So it's about 5 or 6 minutes. It's well worth it. I really encourage you to watch it, especially if you've never been out on a migration night before. And there's a link to it on our volunteer materials page. And then, yeah, this is the time to go find your reflective vest, to get batteries for your flashlight. We fortunately have a little bit of, we've already had, I think I have a picture. This is a picture from our first migration night of this year, February 28th, second earliest recorded migration night in 18 years of keeping track. It was a small night. It was not a big night. But there were some surprises out there. So the season is underway. The salamander forecast is being updated daily. There's some field reports you can read from the first couple of migrations. There are many more migration nights to come. It's really only just begun. And so, but we do look like right now that there's a little bit of a lull. We might have some time to give you, we don't look like there's good conditions for migration for the next 5 days at least. So this is a good time to go get your vests and your flashlights and all of that. And so we have a little bit of time for questions, and I'm going to turn to Nate, who I have not been reading in the chats except glancing to see your pop quiz result answers. So, but Nate has been reading them. And so Nate, are there questions to ask me some questions that people have asked?
Yeah, so we got a lot of them answered. Shannon just asked a question. How do you get this kind of movement started from scratch when there's currently nothing like it in your town? How do you
Yeah.
get people on board to go out in the rain when they haven't got the habit?
It's a great question. I hear from people every year who really want to get this going in their neck of the woods. And so I have a few pieces of advice. One is start small, pick one site, find a site, you know, using what the kind of information we shared, bring some friends with you. Just go out with a few people, find one site and start going there. You can use any of our materials on our website are freely available to download, to share, to adapt. If you need editable files, you can email me for them. And so that can also help. You know, I think once you get some momentum going, you have pictures to share, you have excitement to share, I think people will start to get more excited about it. But start small, start with one spot in your town and a few friends. That's my advice for that. And if there is a place like the Harris Center near you or a conservation commission, those are also really great organizations to connect with because they already are networked with people who care about nature. And so they may be able to help get the word out to like-minded folks who are interested in this. So even if you don't live near the Harris Center, that's also reminds me, there is another page on our website, other Crossing Brigade programs. Every program that I hear about, there are people, we are not the only ones doing this. There are people in Vermont and Maine and Massachusetts and New York and Pennsylvania and Virginia, New Jersey. We have a list of as many of those as we know about on our website to help you find your way. And even some grassroots efforts where there's just one person in a town and said there's who says, email me if you want to come out in our town. We have that all on our website. So if you don't live in Southwest New Hampshire, we have a page for you and see if you can find something close to you. And if not, if you start one in your town, tell us about it. We'll add it to that webpage and hopefully help some people find you.
So
All
in
right.
that same vein, Tara had asked, do you notify local police departments? Oh, sorry, my chat just jumped around. Do you notify local police departments on potential big nights when you have many volunteers out on the road in certain locations? And any tips for what to say to get them on board?
Yes, we did not used to do this. And then one day the Keene Police Department came and sent everybody home and shut us all down. And so now we do this. It is obviously more helpful if you are able to partner with an organization like the Harris Center. I do those calls. I don't ask our volunteers to do them. But we're all allowed to be on the roads at night. These are public rights of way. And so I usually call and I just say, I'm giving you a heads up. We might have some volunteers out tonight. They've all been informed to wear reflective vests and be aware of traffic. And I just wanted to let you know, I call the dispatch. I say, I just want to let dispatch know, like the non-emergency number, right? And I actually, the Peterborough, New Hampshire dispatch, I called her last week and she said, oh, I love salamanders so much. And she talked to me about salamanders for several minutes. And then one of the on-duty police officers stopped by and walked the crossing with our volunteers for a little while that night. So in the beginning, it sounds weird. And in fact, another volunteer that night had a Rindge police officer stop and talk to her. And she showed him the Harris Center website on her phone and said, I'm part of this thing. And he said, he kind of laughed and said, that's great. And do you need anything? Can I help you? So around here, people are learning about it more, but I do think it's a good idea to call and give them a heads up. We don't have to ask permission because we're allowed to be on the road, but I do think it's helpful. And that way they can ask you questions in advance and and you can talk about any concerns that they might have. And they might say that road is really unsafe. And we know a lot about that. And are there other places you could go that are safer or things like that? But I do call for this, a handful of our sites where I know that we're likely to have a lot of volunteers. Yes. I also guess I just want to recognize, I also have to say that obviously there are many people who do not have safe interactions with police officers, and you have to do what feels safe for you. And so I understand that that's a privilege for some of us that not everybody enjoys. And so, do what feels safe for you. Okay, sorry, Nate, go ahead.
Paul had asked a question, if salamanders are ever banded, almost like bird banding. I had never heard of anything like that, but it's an interesting thought.
They're not banded, but they, well, for one thing, with the spotted salamanders, the photos are the equivalent of that. It's essentially taking a record of their markings. But what happens with herps, reptiles and amphibians, is that they are pit tagged. So a little tiny tag, kind of like what the chips that go in cats and dogs, but smaller, can be inserted underneath their skin. And so then if you have a pit tag reader, you can scan that and identify that individual. So not bands, but a different kind of marking. Toe clippings, Brian has mentioned, that can happen, but they can regrow toes. They're so amazing that they can regenerate. So that is good for one season, but not necessarily good for future seasons. So pit tagging is a little bit more long-term.
Mayrin had the question, what are a spotted salamander's predators?
That is a great question. People look at those polka dots and think about warning coloration, right? And I'm sure that it is. In fact, I had my mentor, the person who founded the Salamander Brigades, David Moon, he wanted to know what it tasted like to kind of like that warning coloration, not that he didn't want to eat a salamander, but he wanted to see what it was like. And so he licked his hand after a night of moving them across the road and reported that it was incredibly acrid, that it was bitter. It made him really, it was terrible. And so I think for some animals, that probably is their reaction when they try to eat a spotted salamander. But I have seen barred owls eating them. I would wager that other raptors probably eat them too. Their migration nights are dangerous because mostly they are underground and safe from things like barred owls. But on migration nights, barred owls are really clued in, and they are often perched on the side of the road, scanning for amphibians and picking them off. And they also will go into vernal pools and shuffle through with their talons and pick frogs and salamanders up from the bottom of the pool. I have seen trail cam photos of that. So those are some predators that I know about. Great. Well, if you have questions, Nate and I are both available by email to answer them. It's sometimes a little slow during salamander season. I get a lot of questions, and so I might be slow to respond. But I encourage you to ask any questions that you have. Check out our website and look for an email from me either tomorrow or Monday with a bunch of these links and some more information. So thank you all for being here and sticking it out. I know an hour and a half is a long time on Zoom, so I really appreciate you all being here. And I hope to see you out there on a road on the next big night.